What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassity. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Folks, don't forget to follow this show. Subscribe to it, share it, like it out. It really helps. I mean, it really does help. It really helps the show. So who are we talking to today? Well, I am very excited to be having this person as my guest. It's Richard Bronson. You might have heard of the name. Because if you go back, Richard was one of the partners at Stratton Oakmont. Anybody heard of Stratton Oakmont? Yeah, Stratton Oakmont, that one, The Wolf of Wall Street, that movie, Stratton Oakmont. He was a partner there. And then after Stratton, he went and launched his own firm called Biltmore Securities, grew it up into 500 plus people, over $100 million in business. And everything came crashing down about the same time that all the other stuff came crashing down with Jordan Belfort and all the rest of it. What I think I have been so fascinated with Richard Bronson, and I love these type of stories is yes, they can take you down. The federal government can take you down, but they didn't take his brain. And you know, when Richard got out of prison, he was more or less homeless. He could have just curled up and gone off into a corner, and he didn't. He got involved with some reentry things that were very impactful. He got involved with Defy Ventures, and then he started his own company. And that company was all about how do you get these people that have been previously incarcerated, formerly incarcerated in prison, how do you get them jobs? You know, there's 70 plus million of them out there, and he called that company 70 million jobs, and he started going after it. He got funding, and he's that type of guy. He just doesn't quit. Even when it looks like all the chips are down, he just keeps on going. I can't wait to unpack all this. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes going spending a couple weekends walking car lots, looking for a car, and then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Richard Bronson, welcome in. How are you?
Great, Brent. Thanks for having me.
So I was just saying we should have just recorded the first 10 or 15 minutes here we were talking. You were telling an incredible story about being in prison and there was a hurricane coming and they put you all on a bus. And when you went to the other prison, they said, wait, we're not looking for 800 prisoners. And they sent you over to Mississippi. I said, we should have just recorded all that. Richard, you have lived quite a journey of a story. I thought maybe what we should do is go back a little ways because there's a lot of different things you can look up about you, but can you take us back a little bit to when you were growing up, your mom, dad, siblings, where you were before you became a guy in the investment world?
Sure. I am from New York and I grew up on Long Island. I had a nice childhood. I went to school to study journalism, and that was my plan to, work in publishing or something media related, work at a magazine or a newspaper. And when I got out of college, that's what I started out doing. But I quickly realized that there's no money in that. In New York, in Manhattan, money is
everything.
is everything. And, I was interested in the pretty girls, and that's an expensive proposition,
Uh-huh.
needless to say. So I had lots of friends who were working on Wall Street, and that was the era of, greed is good.
Yeah.
So,
The movie Wall Street.
the movie
Yeah.
Wall Street. So that made a lot of sense to me. So I got a job working on Wall Street. And like the second week I was working there, I was just trying to figure things out, and Black Monday occurred.
Oh, wow.
And
1987, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when, uh, all of a sudden I
This is your
came,
second week? Your
yeah,
second
second or
week?
third week.
God.
And, what did I know? I was just, listening to all these experts pontificating on, what we should be doing with our clients' money. And, I was very impressed with all these smart people. And I came in and I didn't really have too many clients if I had any. And, I was watching all these other people who were experienced and smart, presumably, and the market just completely dropped like a rock. Jump ahead to, the last week,
Yeah.
and, we've kind of gotten used to that sort of thing happening, but that, hadn't happened before, other than during the Great Depression.
Right.
So it wasn't lost on me that all of these supposed, experts and pundits who we were supposed to, listen to like they were oracles, they didn't know anything.
They didn't see it coming.
They didn't have any idea, and yet we were supposed to, really base our businesses on following, their very good advice. And here if you were to do that, you would have clients who would be very angry at you. You'd lose their business, and it wasn't your fault. It was someone else's advice that you adhered to. And it's sort of, very quickly, it made me very cynical about the whole business. And
Which was
very quick,
probably a good thing, that time period, being that young and just getting into
well, I
that.
wasn't that young, but yes, I was young in the business.
Yeah.
And it very quickly, I came to the conclusion that, all right, if I'm going to do this, the one thing I know I have to do is make sure, yes, I want to make sure I do my best to take care of my clients, but I also have to take care of myself,
Hmm.
because I'm working very, very hard, and I don't want it to be destroyed in one day because I listened to somebody else. So that was always in the back of my mind. So in any event, I worked at a couple of different firms, and I was always a good salesperson. So that served me well. But at a certain point, I got tired of these big investment banking firms, and I left the industry, and I was thinking about going back into publishing or journalism or whatever. And I ran into a friend of mine, and who was in the business. And he told me that he was working at this firm on Long Island, and a brokerage firm. And I said, Long Island, I'm used to working at these fancy investment banking
Right.
firms
Right.
that people wear expensive suits and went to good colleges. And where the hell are you? And he goes, well, I'm making a lot of money. You should do it. I'll introduce you. Come tomorrow and check it out. And I go, Long Island, that forget about it. I'm not going to do that. And he goes, let me just show you something. And he pulled out a check from his wallet. It was like $100,000. And he goes, this is what I earned last month. And I was taken aback because he was a talented guy, but he wasn't that talented. And I said, does this check clear? I was so incredulous. And he goes, yes. So I
Is it
said,
clear? Good,
yeah,
good question, though. Good question.
yeah, I was highly suspicious. So I said, all right, it was worth at least me checking this out. So I met him, and, this company was based in this like warehouse in a like a industrial park.
Yeah.
And I get there, and it's this huge open, big space with row upon row of desks with mostly guys, and they're very young, and they're all standing up, yelling into the phone, talking to clients. And they were not very sophisticated on the phone at all, certainly not what I was used to. And every once in a while, they would slam down the phone and they would yell out like 100,000 shares, that they had just made a sale. And they would be giving high fives all around. And I knew that they had done something very, very well. But 100,000 shares, where I was from, that was a huge transaction. That was
Yeah.
an institutional sale, because we were selling New York Stock Exchange stocks that were 50, 60, $70 a share. That was a
Right.
huge transaction.
Absolutely.
And I didn't think these guys were doing institutional business. My friend said, I go, what are they, I asked, what are they selling? And he would tell me a name of a company that I'd never heard of, and it's a $3 stock or whatever. And he said, the commission is like 50 cents a share. So in other words, this guy just earned $50,000 on that one phone call. And so I was pretty taken aback by it. So he goes, let me introduce you to the two guys who own the firm. So the first guy was a guy named Danny Porsche. And then the next guy was Jordan Belfort, who was played by Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I met Danny. Actually was a friend of my brother. I didn't realize at the time. And I met Jordan. And, Jordan was like a real Long Island Queens guy, rough around the edges. But, he was obviously a smart guy who knew the markets, knew trading. And I figured, all right, with what I knew, I figured if this guy could do that transaction, I could certainly do well, if not a lot better. So I said, I'll give it a shot. And so I started working there, and I did very well at first. And my position there grew, and eventually, I became a partner there, which, certainly grew my earnings potential. And after about a year or so, the two of them came to me and this other guy who brought me in and said, hey, would you guys like to own your own brokerage firm in Florida? And I was not married. I had no kids. So for me, it was
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good. The other guy who became my partner, he had a wife and kids, so he had to give it a little thought, but he was game. So we went down to Florida, southern Florida. It was Fort Lauderdale. And we bought for very little money a licensed firm. And part of the deal was that Stratton would help us, get in business real quickly, and we would do deals together.
Sure.
In an illicit fashion, and we would participate in their IPOs, which would, based upon the manipulation that we were doing, would triple and quadruple on the day. And the first time we did it, we became the firm in Southern Florida, and we had brokers throughout Florida and elsewhere lining up in our door. They wanted to be in on it. And they knew that we had an association with Stratton, and they knew that if they came to work for us, they too could make an enormous amount of money. So in short order, we had this big business making an enormous amount of money, and me and my partner became rich very quickly.
Wow.
Yeah. And my life changed enormously. I had a house on the beach next to Eric Clapton's house, and I became art collector and fancy cars, and I had a nightclub on South Beach and all of the other trappings. I was involved with women who were way out of my league.
That happens.
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, obviously I knew what I was doing. I was breaking the law. And furthermore, I knew the day would come that
So you knew that you at
100%
that time you knew that what you were doing was something that was outside
illegal.
of. Okay.
And
Yeah.
and what's more, I knew that at a certain point I would have to pay the price for it, which, you
And you
know,
were riding the wave of the great success. And did you think maybe it could last forever?
no, I
No.
knew that I knew that one day the guys with the windbreakers with the letters on their back would come knocking on my door.
Did you ever think at that time to get out?
Um,
Or just
yes,
say, okay, I got enough. I'm going to put
yes,
all my chips in, put them all
yes. But I knew,
and take it out.
but when I made the decision to get out, I also knew it was too late at that point because the guys at Stratton were already in the midst of their own legal problems. And I knew eventually that would get sewn up and then they would come to us.
So Richard, were they like, was Jordan sharing that with you guys that, hey, I've got, like in the movie and the book, I read the book like when I was at Leavenworth. It was kind of strange. That's where I read that book.
Oh, you were going to say when
Yeah.
I was 11. But okay, go
No,
ahead.
not 11, but at Leavenworth.
Right.
And, you know, I couldn't tell when either by the movie or the book, how much everybody that was around Jordan knew how deep it was going with this FBI guy that was really attached to him, that wanted him. Because it didn't feel like that Jordan was too afraid of him. You know, it was like, I'm almost like playing with him in the sense. But as far as you guys were in the stratus, you know, around it, were you aware of how serious it was getting?
Well, the way these things work, certainly as it relates to them and us,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't start with a federal indictment. It
No.
starts with first civil, it starts with civil lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're getting sued by a customer for unauthorized trading or something like that.
Right.
And then, you know, like
Raises a red flag.
the NASD is, you know, there's a complaint,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a bunch of complaints, and then the state, Indiana or Michigan, is filing some charges against you, and then the SEC files a civil action against you, and then you know, the NASD will bring a case against you where you can't do an IPO, or one of the principals has to sit out for a year. So it's very incremental,
Mm-hmm.
but it is inexorable and inevitable where it's all heading. And then you're getting press, and you know where it's going. And we employed a, you know, a white collar, you know, criminal attorney. Ours was Ike Sorkin, who was Bernie Madoff's attorney,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and he told us all along where this is going, and we knew. And it was just a question of time when it occurred.
Did you ever think just to get on your private plane and fly south?
No, never, ever, ever. And what's more, I mean, and I
Because
don't,
everything you just said, Richard, just gave me PTSD because we went through a 6-year investigation and it was incremental.
yeah,
Started in the States, and then we were in 25 states, and then it just keeps going. And then
yeah,
all of a
yeah, yeah,
sudden,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And it impedes your ability to do business.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, little by little, you know, there's less motive. There's no reason to be even in business because you can't make the money, and it sort of impedes your ability to fight also.
Right.
But from my point of view, and I can't speak for anybody else, but I really, and I do not for a second say this in any way that this mitigates my guilt, because I don't, this is for me 30 years ago or whatever that I was doing all this shit, but I felt guilty about what I was doing all along. And, and the fact that I knew it was wrong only makes me more culpable as far as I'm concerned. So, I went through all of this. I forget the point that I was trying to make, but
Well, I asked you the wild question if you ever thought about just getting on your
oh
plane
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
flying
yeah.
south.
What my partner and I did prior to us being indicted, we paid everybody back,
Okay.
which I don't think too many people would do. We paid everybody back because it was in
So
our,
you made everybody whole while
yes,
this is
it
all
was in
going
our
on.
enlightened self-interest, I think.
Yeah.
I felt guilty about doing it, about taking their money. And I thought maybe this will make me feel a little less guilty. And B, knowing that the day will come that we'll have to answer for all this, we figured, well, maybe this will mitigate
Mitigate some of what you'll
some
have
of,
to deal
right,
with. Yeah.
exactly. And at least we won't have restitution to pay,
Mhm.
which ended up being the case. The judge said, I've never had a case like this where there was a huge financial crime, but there's no damages. So that was at least good.
Oh,
Um,
I mean, it's like the analogy of taking a big heist from a bank and then giving all the money back to the bank. And then
yeah,
they,
leaving the money as you're making your getaway or something.
right. Exactly.
But I did not. People, when I got out of prison, you mentioned that I was homeless. Yeah, I was also destitute
Hmm.
because I was deeply in debt when I got out of prison. The funny thing is when I gave my elocution, when
Hmm.
before you're being
Statement you make in front of
yeah,
the judge.
before the judge is sentencing you and they give you the chance to talk, which is a
Mhm.
waste of time because the judge already made up his mind. But in any event, I said, Judge, I just want you to know I had the opportunity, obviously, to bury money or to hide it or whatever. And I didn't do it. As a matter of fact, whatever money I had, even money that wasn't ill gotten, I, we paid back everybody. And whatever I had left, I gave away to charity. And that was true. And the judge goes, yeah, but it wasn't your money to give away. And that was when I knew I was sunk.
Mm.
He didn't give me any credit for doing that at all.
How long, Richard, did you guys go through from the time that um, when you were talking about
Fled.
the, well, yeah, when you went through all these different hoops that you had to jump through and what you explained, how it all happens kind of like a house of
It's a
cards.
long, protracted
How
process.
long was that process?
3 years,
Yeah.
4 years. It's a long time.
Yeah.
That you have this sort of plan. You're on the
And
one
you
hand,
knew that you were going to plead the whole time. You never
oh yeah,
thought of,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
right,
You're fighting it for as long as you can because you want to stay in business and there's
right,
money to be made.
right,
But ultimately where it's going, and it's just a question of when you say uncle.
right.
But when the guys show up with badges and guns,
What was that like? Where were you when that happened?
I was in a new business. It was some internet marketing company that I had started. I had left the securities business. And honestly, and then, these two people show up at my office and they say, we'd like to talk to you. And, I knew it was going to happen someday. And the waiting is the worst part of it.
Yeah.
So, on a certain level, I was relieved
Hmm.
because the waiting is,
It's the fear of the unknown.
the
You
fear
don't
of the
know.
unknown is always worse than anything
Hmm.
else. So, on a certain level, I was relieved. Um, and then that's a whole new chapter that you're going through.
Yeah. Well, so when you went in and you pled guilty, you did your statement to the judge. Did you have an idea of what you were looking at as far as time?
Yeah, I had an idea. I mean, based upon, what my
Because I
attorney.
was looking at probation to 5 years. That's what I knew when I walked in that courtroom that day.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping for probation or
We all do.
supervised release or, home confinement, but my lawyer didn't, my lawyer was very familiar with the judge and he said he's a tough guy. Chances are you're not going to get that. But he said you paid everybody back,
Mm-hmm.
and, under those circumstances, there's no damages really. And you went in there. They gave me the chance. They gave my partner and me the chance to cooperate and like wear a wire and bring cases against other people. My partner accepted that deal. I don't blame him. I mean, he had kids and a wife.
Mm-hmm.
I did not accept that. I
Mm-hmm.
said, listen, I'll tell you about me, but I'm not going to tell you about other people. I already feel guilty enough. I don't want to ruin other people's lives. And actually, I felt like the U.S. attorney actually respected that
Yeah.
because nobody does that.
Right. Right.
Mostly people, and I don't blame them. They want to save their own skin and avoid going to prison.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured, listen, I paid everybody back.
How big was that number?
It's a ridiculously inflated number, as you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because they look at the money, and if it was wired from here to here and then here to here, they add them all up.
They love the big number because it makes for big
It makes
headlines.
them look like they brought down
Yeah.
Al Capone,
Exactly.
but so it's an irrelevant number, but it's a
Yeah.
big, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't think. I figured it'll be a couple of years or 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be ending up at a minimum security place.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a wife or a kid,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And in a certain way, again, I felt like I deserved to be punished, and maybe by being, I mean, it's sick, but I needed to be punished.
Mm.
Honestly,
So the judge comes down with your
sentence.
sentencing, and was it? I'm assuming you didn't get immediately remanded.
No,
Yeah.
no, and you know something, I didn't want to be taken away right then and there,
Mm-hmm.
but normally in a situation like that, it takes a while. It's a year, it's 2 years, whatever. I advise people when they ask me, because a lot of people, are referred to me, or they ask me, walk me through this.
Yeah. Tell me about
The
your
whole
nightmare.
scenario. I tell them, go as quickly as you can, because the time that you're sentenced to the time that you actually self-report,
Mm-hmm.
that's the worst time of the whole thing.
Boy, it is, isn't it, Richard? Because it's just like no man's land. I remember when it happened to me, it was in the middle of November. And so I reported on January 14th, 2014. And that time period of Thanksgiving and Christmas, I was like dead man walking.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get started so I could end it.
Yeah, and get the clock tick. Well, yours wasn't that long. Mine was like over a year.
Oh gosh, you waited a whole year before you went into prison?
Yep.
Oh my gosh,
And,
Richard.
I'm single, so I can't get involved in a relationship because, I have to tell that person.
Yeah.
And then, and who the hell wants to go out with a convicted felon who's going to be reporting to prison? And you can't get involved with business deals like that. It's,
Well, the only way that works is that show Love After Lockup. That's you could be in that series if you did that.
Yeah, it's really no man's land, like you
No
put
man's
it.
land, just total
So
no man's land.
So you're totally incarcerated, except you're just outside of the bars. But so I say, get in there and get the clock ticking.
Yeah.
Because you're already in terrible shape. So,
well, let's talk about, because walking into a place like that. When you finally do walk into a place like that, well, let's take a break here because I want to get into all that. A lot of people don't like how they show up online. Many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation online. There is hope. It's called Discoverability Company. They can help you, whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story. Discoverability can also help people on how they're portrayed on popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more about discoverability, go to discoverability.co. They're even launching a do-it-yourself SEO option, a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. And the Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, it's a great space for you. You can join us on Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, Richard, you finally wait your year out and you voluntarily surrender where?
At the prison that I was remanded to, which was in Florida. It's right by the Eglin Air Force Base, which was, by the way, the White Collar Support Group.
Yes.
I, from time to time,
you and I have been on there together.
Exactly. I have attended there. The gentleman who organizes and runs it is terrific.
Yeah.
And it is a great thing to do if you're going through this, and I recommend it highly.
Well, Jeff Grant will appreciate that.
Well,
because
he's a great guy with a big heart, and he's very smart. He's an attorney. It's well worth checking out. So I'm sorry, but I had to give it a plug.
I appreciate that, Richard. And both of you and I, I think I reached out to you because you were on one night. Thought, Richard's need to talk to him.
There's a lot of good people. But anyway,
there is a lot of good people.
So that was the original Club Fed, because it was a good place that if you have to go to prison, I'll put it that way. But in any event, it was surreal showing up there, because there's a gate, and it's a big gate that you have to push a buzzer and somebody answers, like you're coming to someone's home and you're pushing a buzzer and there's an intercom and they go, "Yes, can I help you?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm here for the prison."
Yeah.
It's something like that. And they buzz it so it opens. And it was very literally that I'm here and I'm free, but if I take this one step, I'm walking into prison.
Right.
If I go back, I'm not in prison, but if I take another step, I'm in prison.
Yeah.
It was sort of that binary. That one step was so critical.
It's huge.
I'm in prison.
Richard, I so identify with everything you just said, because I knew that my wife and my mom and my brother were behind in the car.
Right.
It was freezing cold outside. I was in Kansas. So I knew everything everything I loved was behind me. And what I was when they opened that gate was the vast unknown, the world I never thought I was going to step into. And I'm stepping into it. I have no choice. Yeah, it's wild.
It's amazing. I mean, you had a longer sentence than I did, but still, it's like, here I'm free. There, I'm walking in here. I'm going to be here for a few years.
Yeah.
Free. I take one step, and there's a part that says, I'm not taking this step. Am I crazy?
Not voluntarily.
I'm not going to do that. So in any event, I walked in there, and it was like I was the first person that ever entered this prison. They were so ill prepared. I go, don't you do this all the time? Like, I'm not the first person to be incarcerated here, am I? They were so disorganized. Like nobody, it was like, figure it out on your own, sort of. But, of course, you have, it's prison, and, you've watched all these movies, and you're fearful, and am I going to be raped the first minute I'm there? And is a gang going to turn me out? And who the hell knows? But I was at this very low security. It turned out that I was safer there, than walking down the street, in New York or Miami where I live. It was
Yeah.
much safer there
Yeah.
because in a low security place, everybody knows that if you get in trouble, they're going to send you to a bad place,
Right.
and that you don't want to do. So everybody knows that, within 5 minutes of being in a prison at a low security place, that do not screw up because there are bad places.
And
So
and they talk about it. They
yeah,
talk
they
about that.
talk
There's
about it, and you talk to anybody there, that's the places that you were afraid of.
right.
So as a result, there's no fights, there's no nothing, and you could yell and scream at a guy who's twice as big as you and scary looking and whatever, and they will do nothing. You could be so macho you could be a little tiny guy on the
Well,
outside. You would be cowering with anybody, but here you could be the tough guy, and nothing. There'll be no
well,
repercussion.
I will say that there was in some of these. I mean, because it's a primitive environment, so it's very. But there, we had a guy that he was an attorney, very demeaning to people, and and he had a good job, and he had snitched on one of the guys, and this guy was the one guy that he probably shouldn't have snitched on because he had worked his way down into the camp.
Uh,
And one night he came in to the attorney and just pulled him, jacked him, and he had a ring on, and it split his upper lip. He went to the bubble where the officer was, and that guy left, and he went, like you said, Richard, away to. And they tell everybody, he's going. They actually sent him to a medium because he had worked his way down, so they bumped him all the way back up. So there are times when somebody is so like
right.
bad that they do get jacked, and that person does leave, and they do go to a bad place. So you're
But,
right. If somebody does something bad, they go up, and it's not good.
but I bet in a higher security thing, he would have been killed.
Oh, for sure,
Right.
absolutely, yeah.
So maybe,
All he
but
got was a busted lip, and he didn't say anything after that. He got real quiet.
right.
Yeah.
But you go in there and they search you thoroughly, which is, I
How
mean,
much time did you get?
I got 22 months.
22 months.
Right.
Which you said, when you walk in there, Richard, it's not like you're going to be there for a week or a month. It's you're going to be there for a while, and you have to
Yes.
figure out how you're going to live there.
Yes. Yes. So I got 22 months, and you get a cursory medical exam, and they ask you about any medic. It's funny. I'm not a great sleeper. So with the no, with my incarceration looming, it made my sleeping all the more difficult. So I was taking Ambien,
Hmm.
and of course, you take Ambien, you get addicted to it very easily. So when I tell them about my medication, I tell them about my taking Ambien, and I go, okay, so they give me whatever I'm taking, but when it comes to the Ambien, we don't give Ambien. So I go, well, how am I supposed to fall asleep? They go, well, that's your problem. And I'm thinking, so when they lead me to, there's like different dorms in the federal thing, and there are double decker bunks,
Hmm.
and they the dorm manager brings me to mine, which is right next to the bathroom,
That's where I
where the
was.
lights are on. They call that lakefront territory. What do they call it? Something lake. It's like a funny name, and there's people constantly, through the night going in and out and
Hmm.
flushing and talking and whatever. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm ever going to fall asleep. But the funny thing is eventually you fall asleep. And as soon as I realized that I was not in any danger,
Hmm.
and eventually because I no longer had anything to worry about because I didn't have, you know, I wasn't feeling guilty because I'm around people who are all guilty already.
Mhm.
So no one's judging me. I don't have to worry about money. I'm not getting lawyer phone calls. I was a high profile person in Miami. So
Mhm.
there's no newspaper articles or anything.
Right.
So I'm finally relaxing for the first time in years. Not only am I sleeping well without Ambien, but I'm taking naps, which in my life I've never taken a nap. It was the most relaxing I've ever been in my life in prison.
So
So I'm going,
that's unbelievable.
this prison thing is not so bad.
But you've got to share with the audience your story about the hurricane, because
Oh,
I've
okay.
not I've not heard anybody talk about something like this before.
It was funny.
Because I want to make, before we preface this story, the worst thing to do while you're in prison is to travel. It's
Yeah.
not something anybody
Yes.
wants
Yeah.
to do. So just to set that up,
Yeah.
you guys in the middle of whatever, they just say, we're all out of here. Grab your pillow.
Okay. Well, first of all, yes. First of all, what people when I had my company 70 million jobs, which you introed, it was a employment platform for people with records. And at the time I did a podcast with a couple of guys who work with me. And it was all about, people who, unlike you, obviously, all podcasts that are prison related are always very sad and intense, and, when in fact, there's a lot of funny things that happen in prison. There are
There
a lot of
is.
funny people, and there's a lot of
Funny
laughing.
nicknames.
There's a lot of laughing that goes on,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of really clever people that are there, and nobody talks about that ever. And there's funny things with how the cooking that gets done and creative things, and that's what we did in our podcast, and
Yeah.
it was great.
Yeah.
But in any event, one of the funny things that happened was, you know, it's just during the day and it's a lazy day, in at Eglin, and all of a sudden there's an announcement, on the PA system, and it says, "Grab your pillows immediately." And everyone's like looking at each other, like, what does that mean?
What?
Grab your pillows.
Haven't heard of
And
that one.
everyone's like looking, and we're all asking like the guards who are standing around, because that's what they do.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Just grab your pillows. So, okay. So everyone grabs their pillows and they're out in the yard with their pillows. And and then they say, proceed to like the parking area or whatever it was called. And we all go to the parking area with our pillows, and they advise us that we're going to be loaded onto the buses. There's all of a sudden like 20 yellow school buses. And we all go to the school buses, and there's all these guards, and they all have the, what are they called? Shackles.
Yeah. Shackles. That's
That,
not good.
right. That's
Very
not good. Now,
dehumanizing.
at the low security that we're at, they don't use shackles. And you almost never see handcuffs or anything like that. They only use those when they're transporting you out, when someone gets into trouble and they're sending you to the county jail, but we didn't see that, wasn't that sort of place. So they're putting us onto the bus, and they're putting the shackles, and they're handcuffing us to another guy. So they're really taking this sort of seriously, and
Very
everyone's
seriously.
freaking out. We had like lawyers that I was friendly with. There were a lot of like
White collar
guys
guys. Yeah.
that and they're all freaking out. They go, "This is not right. Like, I pled, and it was not to be going through this. I pled for a minimum," and they're all complaining. And I'm calling my lawyer, my congressman, and you're going to hear about this.
Mhm.
And everyone's like freaking out. And they put us into the bus, and we're driving like 4 or 5 hours, and we don't know. They haven't told us a thing. Like, what's going on and where are we going? And everyone's saying, my wife is not going to know where I am. And, you're not giving us a chance to make a phone call. And what happens if there's an accident, whatever.
Yeah.
And we end up pulling up, and then we see a sign. I think it was Alabama we ended up in. And there's and we end up pulling up in the middle of nowhere because that's where prisons are.
Right. They're in the middle of nowhere.
Because there's they need like a huge amount of land around the prison. So we pull up in front of this big, big, big prison, which has big gates around it. And we pull up in front of it. And, a few of the guards get out and they go up to the gate and they push a buzzer like they're calling on someone's home. And you see them talking. We don't hear it, of course. And it's going back and forth. And then they just come back and they're talking among, each other. And then the buses take off. And we have no idea what just happened after this 4 or 5. But eventually the word spreads. It turns out we were going to be relocated to this other prison. But unfortunately, our prison hadn't spoken to this other prison. And this other prison didn't have room for us.
It just sounds so much like the BOP.
Right. And like you said, Brent, the travel in at least the BOP, they have what's called Con Air. And that is when they're transporting prisoners from one location to another. You would think it's a plane ride, even if you have to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, what is that, 5-6 hours? But it's never just directly, it's 12 connecting flights. And you have to sleep over 4 different places, and it could take you 3 weeks to get from one destination to another. It's incredibly the logistics.
And they don't care. It just doesn't matter.
They don't care at all. And they don't tell you, and you have no idea.
You never know.
You have no idea where you are or what's going on. So this was sort of like that. So we end up getting back in the bus, and apparently they found a new location located in Yazoo City, Mississippi, which I had never heard of before. Have you ever heard of that, Brent?
Nope, not until you mentioned it today.
No, I haven't had spent that much time in Mississippi to begin with, but certainly not much in Yazoo City. And Yazoo City had like a number of different prisons, but they had one part of the prison that they hadn't opened, apparently, that had plenty of room for us. And that was like a serious prison because it was like cells, with 2 bunks, and it had that, stainless steel toilet sink kind of thing with no toilet seat. So that was like an adult, real prison. And of course, everyone was freaking out about that and complaining. And, they had phones that were available. So everyone was calling their attorneys and their senators and whatever the hell they could do to complain. Of course, I don't think that offered much relief. But after several weeks, they brought us to another low security thing somewhere. I don't recall where. And then, things were.
Were you released from that place?
Eventually, yes.
Okay. So you spent a certain amount of weeks in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And they loaded you guys all up again, and you ended up, and that's where you were eventually released from.
Yeah, in Alabama, if I'm not mistaken.
Alabama.
Yeah.
So, what a story!
It was all crazy.
It's just crazy.
But it was, it was honestly, if there were women there, it would have been a very relaxing long vacation. Is the way I looked at it. The weather was good.
Yeah.
I had a chance to lay out in the sun every day. I worked out every day. I've never been in such good shape.
Yeah.
I made a lot of good friends, and I read a lot. I play the guitar. I practice guitar every day. I was in these bands. Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah.
It was boring at times, but for where I was, it's not like that at other level securities. I recognize that.
Yeah.
But where I was,
wasn't so bad.
It wasn't that bad.
So what were you thinking, Richard, as far as, because you had a whole year to think about going in.
Yes.
When it started getting close to you thinking I'm getting out.
That was bad.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was bad. I mean, again, it wasn't as bad if I had been in a higher security and I had a couple of months. You know, I fully I'm making a joke about this, and I really shouldn't, because for most people, their experience, it is full of violence,
Mhm.
and it's very, very challenging, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just trying to, on purpose, offer a alternative experience.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, it was good in the sense that I gained a lesson in humility,
Mhm.
because when I was on top, making a lot of money, I was a big shot. I had a lot of power. People looked up to me, and I was an asshole. And, there's no excuse for that. And going away to prison helped me
Very
take,
humbling. Probably the most humbling experience you can have is having freedom taken away from you.
yeah. I mean, I mentioned, there's something about having to scrub 100 toilets every day, that if you don't gain a lesson in humility, at least a little bit from that, you're a lost cause.
Well, I think the other thing too, I totally agree with you on that. And I think the other thing that happens, hopefully people don't have to get down to this particular level, but when you do just get down to a plastic chair and a bunk bed and a locker, um, you kind of figure it out, and you learn something about yourself that you can pretty much adapt to anything,
Yeah, there's
almost
that too.
anything.
I
Yeah.
agree.
So that's a weird thing that happens, that you come away with total humility. I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's getting shackled is the most, dehumanizing thing that ever happened to me. And that happened in the mid part of my sentence. I had to go back to a civil trial that had been stayed while our criminal trial. So I had to be brought back to St. Louis, and never been handcuffed and shackled. And so it was a whole new experience. When they brought me back to Leavenworth, what rifles were drawn, and I got
Yeah.
out in all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
yes.
Okay. So you finally get your date. You
Right.
finally say, this is when you're going to go. What do you think is going to happen when you get out into society? What's
Yeah.
going on in your mind?
For the remaining 2 or 3 months prior to my release, I, I became very anxious, because I knew full well. I had a bunch of very close friends. Um, a lot of them were my friends through my business
Mhm.
that completely deserted me. Um, I'm sure they were afraid of being sort of, impacted by my, or getting, I was radioactive, I
Oh
guess
yeah,
is
no,
the
I mean
best way to
you
put
are
it.
radioactive. It scares people to death, and people can get drawn in. It's not
Yes,
like it's not like it's a paranoia thing. Actually, people can get drawn in, and they're
yes,
scared to death of that. And the FBI has the power to bring people in
yes.
and tell them
But
they're going to do this to them, or if they don't, they'll get this. So
yes,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
I don't think that, I had the opportunity to make trouble for them when, I was first indicted
Hmm.
and encouraged to do that, and I didn't do it. And they knew that.
Hmm.
And I had very much been there for a lot of people, financially and in other ways, because some of them had their own problems, and I was there for them. And um, it was, for me, a very, very difficult thing to take friends, and have them, run the other way.
Hmm.
And I lost a bunch of people. So that was, very regrettable for me. So I knew that, people I had lent money to, and here I was, like you mentioned, destitute,
Hmm.
and I couldn't turn to them and say, and they had money,
Hmm.
and they just disappeared. So I had, and also coming out, I didn't know who I was at that point. Am I a big shot still? And I don't
Right.
mean just like a big shot ego wise. Am I a talented sort of guy? Am I a good businessman? Or
Right.
is
Can I
my
make a difference? Can I still make a difference? Can I still make an impact?
right? Or is my success purely on the basis of my doing illegal things?
Mhm.
My confidence was, very iffy. And should I come out and just sort of start at the very bottom and then work my way up, hopefully? Or am I a home run hitter and, go for it? So I didn't really know where I belonged or how I should be approaching this. But I certainly knew that I was deeply in debt the moment I walked outside of prison, and no one's going to feed me and no one's going to give me the medicine I need.
Yeah.
And my friends who, could have helped me, had run for the hills. What I was very, very lucky, thank God, I have a sister. My brother was in my corner, but my sister had the financial means. She had an apartment with 2 bedrooms. She was just incredibly supportive and generous. And I can't imagine without her how I, could have survived.
Mm.
And she
Did
was
either
there.
one of your siblings get involved with your business, or they were always on the outside?
No, they
What-
weren't in no way involved with anything.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but I was in a panic of having no idea what I could do.
Yeah. And I think that's a big point to point out too, because what you just said there is common. I think
Oh yeah,
in prison, when people get that date and they start getting that feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm jumping back out into society. Somebody said it's like jumping into a movie car. It kind of feels that way. Everything's gone on and you're jumping back into society. You're trying to catch up, but your confidence level is down. You don't feel the same. Um, and so you have to figure that you have like this different feeling, and it's like sensory overload. Everything's coming at you all at once.
yeah. That wasn't troubling for me. Maybe if I had been in prison longer, there's this cliche, and this trope that people in prison, they want to be in prison. Like they get out and, they recidivate because they want to be back in prison. It's the only
Right.
place they need to be there or something like that.
Right.
And, you know, I know that that's not true. And I've
I,
worked in reentry for 15 years,
yeah.
and I've worked on the front lines of people, trying to get a job, not getting a job, going back to prison. They don't want to go back to prison. Nobody wants to go back to prison. That's just some ridiculous, theory that people just sort of found convenient to cook up.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. And it's a lot of what you just talked about. It's all the barriers that were unexpected
Yeah.
that they continue to run into, that they didn't know they were going to run into because they thought they had done their time, and that almost like you should have gotten a receipt when you walked out so you
Yeah.
could go back into society. And that's not what it is. It's a long life thing you have to wear around your neck
Yeah. It's
until
a,
the
it's a
end.
life sentence.
But I'm curious though, Richard, when you said you got out, your sister helped you. Were you thinking, because like you did stepped into some really big things with how you stepped into the reentry world. Were you thinking about that, or was that something that just started
No,
coming to you?
no. What I did was, when I got out, I tried to hit a home run. And by that,
Okay.
I mean, I tried to get, an important executive job. I couldn't be in the securities industry anymore because I'm banned for life from that.
Right.
But I tried to do other things. And, you know, and I also was very forthcoming about my record because with the internet, you can't hide
You
anything
have to.
ultimately. So, I figured control the narrative, be forthcoming, and, and sell myself that if you hire me, you're buying a distressed asset and you're buying me on the cheap, that you
Right.
never would have been able to
You're
do
getting the
that.
felon discount.
Yes.
Right.
So, be smart. But that didn't work.
Yeah.
So I thought, what could I do that not only would my criminal background, my record, not only not impede my job seeking capability, but actually could be a positive. What could I do that my background would actually improve my chances of getting a job? And I thought about it and I said, I know, work in the reentry space,
Mm-hmm.
work maybe for a nonprofit that does reentry work, because God knows there are a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I bring to the table that these reentry nonprofits don't really have is I have a lot of experience as a business person.
Right.
And all these reentry organizations, they only have nonprofit people working there.
Right.
And, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a weakness in their organizations. For example, with fundraising,
Mm-hmm.
they have all these well-intentioned people, their employees, many of them go to school, for political science or for, something, that's, sounds good, but it's lacking, something,
Mm-hmm.
and that I could bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought maybe that'll work. And I started looking and it turned out that my lived experience, that actually was very attractive to a bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get in the front door, which is all I needed to do. And I have, like you, we have the ability to sell ourselves
Right.
in a way that their typical people don't have. That's just not their strength. They have other strengths, and certainly they have passion, but I have passion too,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt, going away to prison, living with all these guys, you become friendly with them
Mm-hmm.
and you care about them and you realize they have no shot at all of leading and having a safe and productive life. Because if I couldn't have one with
Right.
my good college education and all my high level experience and success, what chance would they have? And the answer, as I learned, the chances are very, very, very slim. So I was able to get into working at a couple of different nonprofits where I learned a lot about the whole space.
Mm-hmm.
And I also saw the weaknesses and what, in my opinion, they were doing wrong or they weren't doing at all. And I came up with this idea. First of all, I realized that, recidivism, breaking the law again and being sent back to prison, the incidence of recidivism is staggeringly high. And it all has to do with their inability to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
If you're released from prison, 70 some odd percent, unless they get a job, they're going to be sent back to prison in the first year of their release.
Right.
Like 77% are going to go back within a year if they don't get a job. If they get a job,
Goes way
80
down.
some odd percent will live happily ever after. It's that binary. It's that clear cut. So employment is the silver bullet. That's the answer. Okay. The problem is that employers typically don't want to hire people with a record. And the funny thing is that statistically, people with records actually do very,
Are
very
really good
well on the
employees.
job.
Yes.
That happens to be the truth. That's what employers will admit, when they're polled. But they still have, there's racism, there's prejudices, there's all kinds of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with this idea and a way of doing this. And I I put together a whole business plan, whatever. I was able to raise venture capital money. I raised several $1,000,000 to start this business. I did it as a for-profit thing. So I did
Which
it.
I don't want to gloss over this, Richard, because I think it's absolutely fascinating, the things that you just said, because you saw a problem, you worked in some reentry spaces,
Nonprofits.
but then you just did it. You went and put together a business plan, and then you got with one of the most sought after places to go get money and they
Yes.
liked you.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't mention it because I don't know how resonant this will be with your audience. There is a what it's called an accelerator program called Y Combinator, where the some of the best tech companies like DoorDash
Hmm.
and
Very well known.
Airbnb and Reddit and a whole bunch others, they have gone through it. And this accelerator, they invest in your company. At the time I went through it, Sam Altman, who now is like the master of the universe with
AI.
AI,
Yeah.
he was the president and he heard about what I was doing. So, he came forward and he said, we want to invest and we want you to go through the program. So I knew nothing about tech at all,
No, but
literally
this is like the
nothing.
Shark Tanks of
It
what you
is.
did.
It is. It's an amazing organization, and I learned so much. And it just opened up so many doors. So I was able to raise the money,
What
build.
did you think? I don't, I'm not wanting to get off this yet, Richard, because I just think you, you had been destitute. You had been living and then you put this thing together and you go and you present and you've got millions of dollars of this that people are wanting to invest in 70 million jobs. What was going through your mind that night when you went back to bed?
Something. I'm trying to think of how to answer that without sounding like an asshole. Honestly,
It had to give you your confidence back, right? I mean,
no,
what
no.
was it then? How did you feel?
My life. Here's just. I'm going to end up sounding like an asshole if I haven't already. It's just like my life has just been a series of just crazy things.
Yeah.
And I just sort of, if I respond or if I react to all of these different things, I just think I would explode, sort of, and I just sort of, it just, these things happen. My approach to life has always been, because I'm an asshole, I just sort of, I just swing for the seats. I just try
That's
to do,
that's what I was trying to get to. That's where I
I
wanted
just
you to
try to,
land.
I figure, what's the
Just
difference?
do it.
Just
But
do it.
the secret formula, what I wanted you to get to is that you did it. A lot of people think about what you thought about. A lot of people think, I had to do something with my experience. I can't get this executive job over here, but wait, look, I've got all this lived experience now. I'm a business guy. Why don't I put a business plan together and try to make something happen? And you did it. That's the
Yeah.
thing that I think is I want everybody who's listening. You did it. You went out and you did. You didn't know you were swinging for the fences, but if you hadn't have put that business plan together, and if Sam Altman hadn't have contacted you, and you hadn't have gone to the deal, and you hadn't have presented, none of that would have happened.
It's true. Yeah, I figure, what, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the way I was brought up. My father, always told me, just do it, just do it. What the hell you got to lose?
Right.
And, going to prison, I just think just adds to that, ethos.
Yeah.
you know, you went to prison. They're not going to send you back to prison for doing this.
Right.
So just do it. And is somebody so much better than you? That's the way I look at it. I go,
Well, and I think that goes all the way back to when, the crash happened and you thought, well, wait a minute, I could do this. If these guys are the biggest
yeah.
guys in the universe, they didn't know anything. Maybe I'm good at this.
I think I have more confidence than I really should have in myself. I think that's honestly what I think it is. I have this much greater belief in myself than I have any reason to, and so I live in this deluded world of self-worth. So I think that's what I've got going for myself, so I try things, and I end up failing a bunch of times,
Of
but
course, every great business book you read about all the failures in there and then they make it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think I'm daring. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I place big bets, and that's, I guess, why I've never been married and I have no kids, because I wouldn't put any other human being through what I put myself through,
It's a one
So,
man show.
yeah,
Well,
so
so 70 million jobs, it becomes a thing. I mean,
it
if you read
becomes a
about it, you can
thing.
look it up.
Yeah,
Uh, the pandemic hits, which is a terrible thing for a lot of businesses that happened,
yep.
and they start peeling off people.
They
Um,
fired all the people that we placed,
yeah.
and companies stopped hiring.
Hmm.
And that's what we relied on for our revenue. And it just drags on and on and on. I put my own money in, which I didn't have much of, which you're not supposed to do when you're a founder of a startup. But I did it. Again, a big bet that did not pay off, puts me deeply in debt, which I'm still paying back on.
Hmm.
But I have to shut down the company. So now I have to get jobs again. And I'm just way too old to put myself through that. But now I have an idea for a new startup, again, still in the reentry space,
Yeah.
that I'm very excited about. And I think it's going to be an even bigger
Yeah,
success.
I do too. And you and I have been talking, and I think, we're both in this reentry space, and um, what do you think of what's going on in the reentry world right now? Like the, because you swam all in it, and it's got so many issues, you know.
Yeah.
th-
Um, what do I think? I think this. I think um, that the formerly incarcerated, of which at this point is maybe 100 million people,
Mhm.
which
Third of the
relates,
nation.
which equates to about a third of the all the adults in the United States. So it's a huge population. It is a much maligned and much ignored population that I could compare to back in the day women,
Mhm.
back in the day African Americans, back in the day LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
They were all people who um, the general population thought had no economic power or
No voice.
value. They had no voice. They had no political power or voice. Um, Nobody thought they were worth talking to. No politician tried to garner their vote.
Mhm.
No brands tried to market to them directly until they became a thing. And the thought that people would not value women as a important block of voters
Mhm.
is unthinkable.
It is
The,
now at this
the,
point. Yeah.
right. The thought that music companies would not try to market to African Americans, or that clothing companies would not market to LGBTQ people, is like unthinkable.
Mhm.
And yet that's the way it was until they had a moment, until the civil rights movement happened, until the women's movement happened,
Mhm.
until, everything happened with the LGBTQ. I think that it's happening now with the formerly incarcerated,
Mhm.
through Black Lives Matter, through all that happened, with the murders of, African Americans over the last several years, bringing all this attention. Not only that, through the war on drugs,
Mhm.
which meant that every family has an uncle or a brother who's been arrested.
Mhm.
I believe that they are having this moment. And that means that this population, which could easily elect a president
Mhm.
if someone could bring them together and vote together, that could buy a hell of a lot of sneakers and music and brands of all kinds, if they could be galvanized together. But no one has tried to do that. Nobody has tried remotely to bring it together. I think that's an incredible business opportunity. I think it's an incredible political, economic, and social opportunity.
I
And
couldn't agree more.
I think I am uniquely qualified to do that, given my lived experience, given my business experience, and given my passion for it. So that's what I'm working on. I am working on Facebook for the formerly incarcerated, a social network. When asked, and you could chat GPT this question, what are the top 3 things that people with records, when asked, say that they want most? The number 1 thing they say is a job. The number 2 thing that they say they want is housing. The number 3 thing they say, which is surprising to me, they say they want community. Now that's like sort of a squishy, esoteric thing that you wouldn't think that many people would answer, but that's what they ask for. And nobody has worked anything on that at all.
No, and I think what you just said is, I think, so spot on. That's why I really enjoyed our conversation the other day, because I also feel like that if you could put an umbrella over the top of that, like a card-carrying member of an AARP, that you actually do create a movement of people who have a whole lot of power if they band together, and they can change a lot of different things. And that's, I love that your brain is engaged in this, Richard, because that's where change happens. That's where things happen in spaces like this. So I guess to wrap up, what do you think is your biggest takeaway through all this that you've experienced?
What's my biggest takeaway?
Because you've experienced a lot.
Well, I am very, very much in touch with my own mortality. And I can't help but think that any day, I mean, I'm a Buddhist. And the Buddhist says the only thing that's certain is you're going to die.
You're going to die. None of us get out of here alive.
For sure. And I'm very, every day that I get older, and I have all kinds of, physical issues. So, I can't help but think about that a lot, and I think, well, Richard, you've had a life. And if it happens tomorrow, I'm prepared for it. At least I think I am. I've had a life. And I could use a rest. So,
well, I could say more than that. I think what you have done with your life has made a difference, and I think you're still trying to engage in making a difference and making an impact. And that's what I love about doing these interviews on this show, is that you brought it up earlier. Our show isn't about people who've gone to prison. Our show is about people who've lived through a nightmare and survived and figured out how they can get their confidence back to try to make an impact, or just live the way they want to live when they have survived what they've survived. And I think that's where you are. You have done a lot of things that people would read about in books, but you haven't quit. You're still engaged and looking for the next big thing. And I love that. I think that's inspiring to people, because if you just do it, if you believe in whatever's going on in your head and you take action with it, who knows?
I'm pretty sure it won't play out the way I'm expecting. The old Yiddish expression, man plans and God laughs.
That's it. I love that. Love that phrase. Well, for those talking about gratitude and mortality and everything else, I want to thank Homestead Financial. Home mortgage lets me use all this fancy equipment in here, lights and action. And if you've got home mortgage needs, Greg Afdiev is your guy. He knows all of his stuff. If you're looking for a book out there, I've got one. I can't reach it. It's here in the back. Get it. Nightmare Success on Barnes and Noble, Amazon. If you are looking for anything about me, go to brentcassity.com. I spell it wrong. I spell it with a TY, not a DY. I would love to have been part of the Sean and David Cassidy deal, but I wasn't. I was the guy that spelled it wrong. Cassity. As I used to say when I was writing my letters and emails back and forth, from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Richard Bronson, man, thanks so much for being here today and
I
sharing.
had fun. Thanks for having me, Brent.
It's good stuff. Nightmare Success, in and out.